Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Emily Barson. I'm a senior advisor at Public-Private Strategies. Thank you so much for joining us today for this briefing on the state of democracy in North Carolina. Today's briefing is hosted by the Business and Democracy Initiative, which is a partnership led by Public-Private Strategies, the Black Economic Alliance, and the Leadership Now Project. The initiative works to educate and activate business leaders on issues related to defending and advancing democracy and democratic institutions. We convene business leaders around issues of interest, like this briefing today, and we provide opportunities at the state and federal level to engage on advocacy, communications, and organizing efforts around democracy. And you can learn more at our website, businessanddemocracy.org. I also want to thank our co-sponsors for the event, which you can see on your screen today. We are grateful for their partnership of all these important organizations, and we know this work is only possible and is more powerful when it is done collaboratively. So thank you to all of our partners. Just a bit of housekeeping as we get started. Today's event is being recorded. And please feel free to enter any questions you have for our presenter and panelists into your Zoom Q&A box. We have a packed panel, but we will do our best to address questions during the presentation today. We are delighted to host this important conversation and want to get started without further ado. So let me introduce our moderator for today. Jim Duffett is the Southern States Regional Director for Small Business for America's Future. Jim has over 3 decades of coalition building experience on small business, healthcare, and other issues. And the Business and Democracy Initiative is delighted to be in close partnership with Small Business for America's Future on reaching and engaging small business owners in defense of our democracy. With that, I will turn it over to Jim to get us started.
Thank you, Emily. And I definitely want to welcome everybody again, and a very special thank you to the panelists, the co-sponsors, and everyone on this call. It's a very huge turnout, and because I think people realize that a strong democracy does mean a strong economy. Trust in democracy is the cornerstone of the American economy, and no one understands that better than small business owners. Entrepreneurship depends on democracy, in which people know that if they have a good idea to serve a market and market need, and are willing to sacrifice and work diligently, their concept can become a successful, a profitable business for themselves, their families, and their communities. With our nation's democratic system under more stress than ever, the small business community is a critical voice in the fight to preserve our freedom, to openness and democracy in our democratic system. Economic prosperity is tied directly to a healthy democracy. Research shows that business owners overwhelmingly feel that there's a direct link to truly a representative government and a functioning market economy. And according to Gallup, small business is the most trusted institution in the United States. With that, I'm honored to introduce Ann Tindall. Ann is a consultant at or counsel at Protect Democracy, where she works to secure accountability for abuses of power and counter anti-democratic activity at the federal and state level. Prior to joining Protect Democracy, she served as Assistant General Counsel for Litigation and Oversight at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. With that, Ann, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi there. I am really excited to be here with all of you. As Jim said, my name is Ann Tindall, and I'm an attorney at the nonpartisan and cross-ideological nonprofit Protect Democracy. Protect Democracy is a national organization dedicated to the rule of law, protecting free and fair elections, and countering disinformation and other abuses of power. While our work is nationwide, we have staff in and prioritize work in a handful of states where these issues are particularly salient, and that includes North Carolina. While I spent several years post-law school in private practice and in government positions in Washington, D.C., I am a native North Carolinian, a proud Tar Heel and a current resident of Chapel Hill, or actually with this group, I can be more precise and say Carborough. Most recently, Protect Democracy's work in North Carolina has focused primarily on the Moore v. Harper partisan redistricting case that was recently heard by the US Supreme Court. In that case, we brought together academics and experts from across the political spectrum to urge the US Supreme Court to uphold the North Carolina Supreme Court's determination that extreme partisan gerrymandering violates our state's constitution. We also spoke out against the new North Carolina Supreme Court majority's decision to entertain efforts by legislators who benefit from extreme gerrymandering to reinstate it before the ink was even dry on new, more fair, and thus more competitive legislative maps. And we're worried about what a gerrymandered supermajority in the General Assembly of North Carolina might do. In particular, we're concerned about efforts to make voting harder and less secure. We're worried about efforts to stifle dissent and establish a doctrine of what we can say about our history that is a threat to our educational institutions. And we're worried about efforts to marginalize certain segments of our community. All of these are things that we see happen in non-democratic countries, authoritarian countries elsewhere. And I'm afraid we're going to see some of that here at home. But even with the extreme imbalance in the General Assembly today, we know there are some democracy reforms that both Republicans and Democrats can and have gotten behind. For instance, we've worked with bipartisan groups of legislators in several states to enact legislation that protects voters and election officials from violence and intimidation. Our election workers today are under extreme duress. 1 in 3 say they fear for their physical safety on the job. These are generally retirees. It's my dad, your grandmother, who are volunteering their time to help us vote. And these people should feel safe doing their jobs. And there are things we can do to protect them. We've also seen election administrators, Democrats, Republicans, independents here in North Carolina and elsewhere stand up against those who refuse to recognize the winners of elections. It's frightening that we're at a place where telling the truth about who wins an election and doing what's necessary to allow that person to take office requires bravery, but sometimes it does. And Protect Democracy has been engaged in work across the country to support that bravery and make it harder for cowards or corrupt actors to overturn the will of the voters. So why does all of this matter for you? The fact of the matter is democracy is in crisis, and that is the case across the world. Here in the US, we're seeing that on both the federal level and in states like North Carolina. According to groups like Freedom House, the US is among the countries in the world where democracy is declining the fastest. And that is new for us. We're used to being at the top on lists like that. And that is no longer the case. Around the world, people who seek to undermine democracy follow a similar playbook. They restrict fundamental freedoms like freedom of speech. They politicize independent institutions. They spread disinformation. They undermine election integrity, and sometimes they stoke violence. They also target segments of civil society, and that often includes the business sector. That can happen in Viktor Orban's Hungary, but it can also happen in North Carolina. And as I think you all know, and I will underscore, a democracy crisis is bad for business. We see this broadly where political chaos and instability can impact the economy as a whole. Take, for example, January 6th. After January 6th, the US almost saw its credit rating downgraded because there was uncertainty about the peaceful transfer of power. We also see this impact on the state and local levels, where a level playing field of free enterprise becomes shaky, where elected officials weaponize state power against individual companies for political purposes. We've seen this in Florida, we've seen this in Texas, we could see that here. North Carolina has been cited by numerous publications as the or one of the best places to do business. A huge part of that rating, though, is the strength of our institutions, our public schools, our university system, our courts. All of these provide an environment where business can thrive, and also the willingness of our politicians to compromise and govern effectively. All of these things are threatened by this little d democratic decline. There's good news for you, though. As business leaders, you are in a unique position to defend democracy. Those of you on today's call who lead businesses know that better than anyone. You make products your customers love, you create jobs, you employ people, you're active members of your communities. In many ways, you rise above politics in pursuit of the American dream of entrepreneurship. Year after year, Edelman's Trust Barometer has found that business, much more than media or government, and even nonprofit organizations like Protect Democracy, business is trusted. Business is trusted by Americans across party lines. So in addition to having a direct financial self-interest in preserving the level playing field of free enterprise that thrives in a democracy, business leaders are uniquely positioned to act in nonpartisan ways that can transcend our current polarization. You often have the media platforms and legislative influence, and above all, the community relationships and trust to do so. I know we'll have time for questions. I want to leave as much time as possible for that, but I want to add that we really appreciate our ongoing partnership with Public-Private Strategies and the Business and Democracy Initiative, and want to thank you for bringing us together today. Protect Democracy is always available to support those of you who lead businesses in North Carolina to use your influence to protect elections and rebuild the guardrails of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that insightful reality that we all know that we're faced with. Next, I want to bring our roundtable leaders into this discussion, and I want to let people know that what the format is. There's at least 4 parts. The first part, I'm going to ask the same question to each of the participants for you guys to answer. And then second, we will have a specific question for each of you. And then third, we'll have a similar question that we'll ask for all of you to answer. And then lastly, we hope we'll have time for questions from the audience. So if you do, please type it in the chat. The question for all the panelists, and we'll go through order here, is what does a strong democracy means a strong economy? What does that mean to you and your organization? And can you give an example of pro-democracy action that your organization has taken? And first, Anne, and I know you wear the hat of Protect Democracy, so that may be an easier one, but go ahead.
I hope that everything we do is supportive of democracy, promotes democracy. That's our reason for being. But you know, I think the prompt, a strong democracy is good for business is clear. The case I tried to make that case when I started, but you know, I think that free enterprise and an educated and active community are essential to democracy, and they are essential to the success of all of your businesses. I will not go into all of the details about the many ways that Protect Democracy engages with that.
Well, thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Valerie, and individuals who are on this call can get a deeper analysis of each of the panelists' bio, but I did want to mention Valerie Benton-Smith, again, who's the regional president for the Greater North Carolina Black Chamber. Valerie, same question to you.
Well, thank you, Jim, and of the Small Business of America's Future and Business Democracy Initiative and all the partnering partners for the opportunity to share that a strong democracy means a strong economy for us all. Insight is that democracy has robust, significant, and positive indirect effects through higher human capital, lower inflation, lower political instability, and higher levels of economic freedom. What I mean is that the economic democracy is a socioeconomic philosophy that proposes to shift decision-making power from corporate managers and corporate shareholders to a larger group of public stakeholders that includes workers, customers, suppliers, neighbors, and the broader public. Third, democratic leaders are, as noted, more responsive to voters' preferences. This may thus also be more open to the development, enhancing policies that many voters prefer. Examples could be expanding schooling to the entire population and eradicating diseases affecting the poor. The side benefit of such policies is that more workers grow up educated and healthy, and educated, healthy workers boost economic development. I had the opportunity to speak to a restaurant chain partner from Lux in Greensboro, North Carolina, that stated a strong democracy means a strong economy for us all, when indeed with equal opportunity for resources and fairness. I also spoke to the owner of the UNU Experience in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and the concern is taxes on local businesses is a major concern, as small businesses are a key factor in employment. Currently, to date, the Greater North Carolina Black Chamber of Commerce serves over 500 businesses and over 3,000 supporters of this cause through volunteerism and resources, bringing awareness in the state of North Carolina, which helps millions of families. What does this mean by serving as the voice? We depend on this stronger democracy to uplift empowerment and a decent quality of life.
Thank you very much, Valerie, and great on the impact and input from many of your rank and file members who do understand that a strong democracy does mean a strong economy for everyone. Next, I'd like to bring in discussion Andrew Spain-Auer. Andrew is the Senior Vice President and General Counsel and Secretary at Replacements. Same question to you, Andrew.
Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this on behalf of Replacements. In trying to think about your question, I found on my desk an article that had been shared with me 3 years ago. Members of our senior team and our social impact team have a habit of constantly sharing articles that capture our attention, but this is one that I've kept on my desk for 3 years, and it's Rebecca Henderson's piece in the Harvard Business Review called "The Business Case for Saving Democracy," and it came out right as the pandemic began, and a number of you, I imagine, have read it as we did, and it really kind of encapsulated a lot of the things that we had been talking about for the last 10 years. I'll come back to it, but let me share this first. Our founder and CEO, Bob Page, is a classic entrepreneur. He is 78. He grew up on his family's small tobacco farm in Rockingham County, just north of where we are here in Greensboro. His family had no indoor plumbing. The 6 of them lived in a 3-room house. He began working in the tobacco fields when he was about 5 years old. He was the first person in his family to go to college. He served in the Army. And while working full-time for the state of North Carolina as an auditor, he founded Replacements in the attic of his home. And he, in the next year, was able to hire 1 part-time person. He has grown this business into the largest of its kind in the world. And these are all of his lived experiences. And I tell you all that because he also would say of himself that he is a free market capitalist and he is a progressive, both and. Back to the Henderson piece, the thing that captured our attention about it in talking about the danger of losing democracy for tyranny and oligarchy. Some of the signs for that were extreme gerrymandering and the loss of an impartial judicial system. Really got our attention. And in terms of what we've done about that, Replacements financially sponsors 501c3 charitable organizations and 501c4 social welfare organizations that combat these kinds of problems for the reasons that we're all discussing. And in closing, to answer your question very specifically about something that we have done for a long period of time, we years ago created a corporate PAC. A lot of times people hear corporate PAC and they think that's really bad, but if it just depends on what your values are and what your areas of focus are. Our PAC surveys candidates about issues of concern to us. We then publish our findings and make endorsements. And what we've learned is that it is a way to shape a community. It is very small d democratic. We are engaging with people who say they want to serve, and we're talking about the things that matter to us, and we share our findings with our neighbors. And so that is something that we have done for a very long period of time to try to help educate voters and engage in the democratic process.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for that history of replacements and how all that, has morphed into the fight for democracy on many different fronts. Our next panelist I'd like to introduce is CJ Scarlett, who is the Vice President of Harmony, North Carolina LGBT plus Allied Chamber of Commerce. CJ?
Jim, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm the Vice President of Harmony, which is the official affiliate chamber responsible for the eastern 50 counties of North Carolina. We're charged with supporting and growing the LGBT business and professional community in our region, which includes an estimated 250,000 LGBT workers and more than 400,000 LGBT residents of North Carolina, along with our state share of the 1.5 million LGBT-owned businesses in the United States. It was seen in the disastrous HB2 bill, the anti-LGBT plus and specifically the anti-trans legislation sweeping its way through the legislative hallways on Jones Street. These types of policies will have a significant negative impact on the very people for whom we work to create an even playing field. Setting aside for a moment the horrendous cultural effects caused by HB2, the economic effects will be forever felt within the state. The reality is that an estimated $3 billion of negative impact hit this state due to HB2, which are dollars that cannot be regained. But democracy isn't simply a silo of economics. It's a system that drives our culture, our communities, and our future. Thus, when fear and willful ignorance drive legislation to circumvent the will of the people and create laws that specifically target a segment of humankind to make them feel less than, unwanted, and irrelevant, it also shifts societal mindsets and consequently the safety and well-being of the targeted individuals. While we see in the state legislative bodies around the country the purposeful erasure and avoidance of learning from history in our educational institutions and beyond, the fact is that history is repeating itself. In this case, for North Carolina, it's not far removed from 2016. So we know that the current anti-LGBT bills targeting the very voters of this state will drive away tourism dollars, repel skilled talent, and inhibit workforce and new business development. We've already seen it happen. It still happens even today, as HB2 is a lingering statement by our elected officials that North Carolina is not a place to do business or raise your families if you value humankind and equity. However, history has also shown time and again that we, as an LGBT community, persevere even in the most difficult of circumstances. The failures of our General Assembly and their inability to originate meaningful legislation bettering the lives and workplaces of North Carolinians will not stop us on our organization's work. While it may be more challenging, and there's no way we can completely offset the negative impact of fear-mongering and hate-driven legislation, Harmony will continue to be a welcoming body for LGBT plus and allied businesses and professionals who subscribe to the belief that democracy is for all, not just the majority. and we stand ready to give voice and support when tides shift and another minority is targeted. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you very much, CJ. And thank you also for bringing those economic aspects into this. I think we all realize that linkage is very strong. Next, I want to do a quick round robin on specific questions that we have for people. The first question for Ann: what are the implications for North Carolina and nationally if the partisan maps remain in place for the next decade?
Well, I think they're legion. One thing that we have seen and was cited in the Henderson article in the Harvard Business Review is that extreme gerrymandering contributes to Democratic decline. It does so because one, it prioritizes it makes it easier for extreme partisans to win elections, and by that I mean from the farthest left and the farthest right of both political parties, because it renders the primary the most important election that this person has to win. The result of that is twofold. One is the sort of extreme legislation that we have all been talking about and are concerned about. The other is it is a loss of faith in the government from the people who are represented, and I think you see that across the country, and especially in North Carolina, where we have a legislature that is pushing priorities that don't match the people, and they don't feel like their voice is being heard and carried out. On the national level, one of the things that's most worrisome about the current state of affairs in North Carolina is not just sending more extreme candidates to Congress, but if the North Carolina Supreme Court overturns the decision it made just barely a year ago in Harper v. Hall, there's a risk that the maps on which members of Congress have already been elected will be thrown out. And it's really hard to hold your representatives accountable for doing their jobs well and in good faith, if rather than having the chance to vote them in or out, they just get shunted off to another district. The relationship between a member of Congress and the people in a district is essential to both getting the will of the people done in Washington, D.C., and to the faith that they have in their democracies.
Great. Thank you for both the state and the national perspective. Valerie, you touched on this a little bit in your opening, and if you'd like to expand on it too, is what are you hearing from your members around the state and the connection between a strong economy and a strong democracy?
Well, like I was mentioning earlier, as stakeholders that's vested in the state of North Carolina, which helps, millions of families, like I stated earlier, but nationally, Blacks bring trillions of dollars to the economy. And with that being stated, health and education is a very serious concern. And so we look to that in reference to strength and having that vested interest in the best interest for the state of North Carolina. Because what it does, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying that's great. Pulling on the health and other issues that are directly related to, without a strong democracy, those issues cannot be addressed.
Yes. And, just re-emphasizing that an educated, healthy workers boost economic development.
Great. Thank you. Andrew, you touched on a little bit about your guys' company's history, and CJ talked a little bit about the bathroom bill in the state, and you guys played a very key role in engaging a broader coalition of folks to fight this. Wanted to know what lessons from those battles should businesses take into the fight for the democracy issues that are front and center now and in the future?
Thank you. We were involved in bringing together a business coalition, both with respect to HB2 and the Amendment 1 referendum in 2011 and 2012. That was on our part an unsuccessful effort to stop passage of the marriage amendment, which outlawed same-sex marriage as well as domestic partnerships of any kind in North Carolina. We lost that vote, by the way, at 61%. It was a crushing loss, and yet we felt that we had, for the first time, engaged a really diverse coalition of businesses as well as allies in the nonprofit space. And we have spoken out also about the importance of reproductive choice, and we have spoken out a number of times related to efforts to require sheriffs to collaborate with ICE in a way that would create a lot of distrust of law enforcement in our immigrant and minority communities. And so these are controversial things. We have been praised and vilified. We have been intimidated and threatened. We have been the subject of really glowing media pieces. And for example, the New York Times. There are benefits for being able to stand up, and there are costs. And so I think it's important. I think it's important for a business owner and a business leader to be able to talk openly about what the risks are, and to be clear-eyed about what your goals are. And I'm very fortunate that for 25 years I've worked with Bob Page, our sole shareholder, and he has always said that there are things that matter more than money, and principle is number one. And so recognizing that, you then have to have a real conversation about, what are your priorities? What in good conscience can you just not, you just have to speak out. If you didn't speak out, you couldn't live with yourself. I mean, you can't do everything, but what are the things that you just can't be silent about? And then you have to mitigate against the risk. We've lost business as a result of our stands, but we have gained so many customers who said, I support you because you share my values, or I don't want, I'm placing this order because I don't want those other people to win. And so that's been as scary as some of these efforts have been, candidly, it's always been worth it. And I would say to this group that there is strength in collaboration, and there is when we can work together, we can do a lot more than just any one corporate voice can. So those are my thoughts.
Well, thank you. And thank you for bringing in the bottom line. It has kind of pulled a thread that I want to ask in the kind of the last a question. But before we get to that, Scarlett, you also, CJ, you also had touched on this in your talk too, but I didn't know if you wanted to tease us out a little bit more in terms of how the negative democracy policies that have passed here in North Carolina really impact the ability to having a business-friendly environment.
Well, legislation like HB2 and the anti-trans, anti-LGBT legislation that they're looking to pass are going to drive away tourism dollars. It's going to repel skilled talent. It's going to inhibit workforce and new business development. This kind of fear and willful ignorance that we're seeing right now to circumvent the will of the people and create laws that specifically target a segment of humankind to make them feel marginalized, unwanted, and irrelevant is simply unacceptable. LGBT people, particularly trans youth, are literally killing themselves because they feel so targeted and unwanted. I read today that the Trevor Project did a survey that found that 50%, up to 50% of of LGBT youth considered killing themselves in 2022. Part of that was the pandemic and the isolation they felt, but also because societal and political pressure on them is intense. It's so intense. And I'm a queer woman, but I can't imagine being a trans person and having to live in a state that literally has a bullseye on my forehead that doesn't want me to live my authentic self and to love who I love. It's incomprehensible to me. And so these policies simply cannot be allowed to stand. And I wish that everybody could hear the stories of some of the people that are members of our chamber, so they can understand how important this issue is. And it applies to all marginalized communities. I mean, when someone has, again, due to willful ignorance or fear or political advantage, decides they're going to target a population and use them as a dog whistle to motivate their base, that to me is what evil is. And we simply cannot allow it to stand.
Thank you. What I wanted to do is the next question is going to be a round robin, the same question, but I want to pull out a couple things that I've been hearing from all of you guys. And last year, before the election, SBAF of North Carolina, we had this discussion about what should small businesses do. And one of the points of the question I'm going to ask you. So we did have nearly 200 businesses who made sure that that all their employees were able to register to vote and gave them the ability to go out and vote. We want to make that 2,000, 5,000 by 2024. But my question is, and this gets into some of the points you guys have raised, is what is the fear, and how do we overcome that fear with some businesses, to Andrew's point about the pluses and minuses of taking a step forward and speaking out? How is this going to hurt my business that, if people who I'm selling to stop? So how do you balance that? And I know Andrew mentioned that. And lastly, what actions do you guys think that the business sector can continue to take or should be taking to use their voice on this issue? So I'm going to go you to Ann, and I know, Ann, you kind of wear a different hat of a broader coalition, but you have a lot of experience with your networks that you work with.
Sure. I think a key here is taking a long-term view on what is good for your business and the bottom line. Obviously, many sectors of our community these days are facing threats and intimidation, either for just being themselves or just doing their jobs, or for speaking out about things that are essential but that are important. If we stop doing that, our democracy is at risk, and for all of the reasons that have been covered, by each of the panelists, free enterprise and a workforce to support it depends on a solid democracy, and the handful of clients or customers you might lose for speaking out are a small cost for preserving the democracy that our free enterprise depends on.
Thank you. Valerie, same two questions. And again, some of that you touched on, but just wanted to see what else you'd like to add.
Yes, to pretend that there is not a huge racial wealth gap is just being false. There is a huge racial wealth gap, but day by day, we change that, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month. That can change by bringing awareness and education and the importance of voting, and not telling you who to vote for, but to be a voice in what happens in your life. You can be part of the solution by voting. You can't complain about what's going on if you're not going to be a voice. So what the chamber offers is bringing that type of awareness. Not only that, I been in the automotive industry for the past 20 years, and it is male dominated. However, embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it affects the bottom line is important, but also generational as well, because now I'm now in my third generation of clientele. So I'm stating all this to say that embracing that is actually making a safer community for us all, a more loving community for us all. And that is something that we need, especially when you're seeing all the hate that's going on. Whatever happened to embracing, not just saying diversity, equity, and inclusion, but actually being inclusive.
Excellent. Thank you. Andrew, you kind of started us on that topic about, you know, the opportunity, the pushback and stuff, but other thoughts on that, and what other things you think businesses should be actively working to do now?
You know, I do think that there is strength. There is strength in collaboration. There is strength in numbers, and so the ability to form and work in coalition with others is a great way to deal with those real concerns, be they financial or, quite frankly, the fears of violence in the culture we live in. And so I think that one of the things that we've sort of been thinking about and talking about here is, you know, how important it is to sort of be an upstander related to core American values. Like, I've been watching, and as you've been watching, what's been happening with Disney and its war with Ron DeSantis. And, you know, DeSantis, in a very curious way, wants to silence Disney. And, you know, I think it's really important for all of us to be able to say, you know, look, I mean, we have the right to speak. We have the right to speak our minds and share our perspectives and values. And businesses, as you pointed out, have an ability to engender trust when they speak the right way, authentically, for the right reasons, not to sell all the time, but to authentically speak about matters of conscience. You know, we can have an impact, and so I think not being silenced is something that we can all do to stand up for these small d democratic values.
Great. CJ?
I tell you, I'm glad you brought up Disney, because how cool is that they are standing up to the governor of their state and taking a serious hit. I will say that the LGBT community is extremely loyal, though. For every dollar that is not being spent at Disney or on Budweiser, we are making that up. They are creating new fans. So economically, you may lose some customers. You may see a hit at first, but the people who stop using your service or product, over time, they'll come back to you. Like I have a real struggle with Chick-fil-A. Struggle with Chick-fil-A. My son and daughter-in-law take my grandkids to Chick-fil-A, and it just kills me. But every once in a while, I get Chick-fil-A. And I'm embarrassed to say that, but it's true. But even though it looks initially like people are going to lose business, like these businesses are going to suffer because of this backlash, that money will come back to you in probably even greater measure. There's a new movement going on where they don't just want LGBT people to be in their place. They want us to not exist. They are questioning our very existence. In the case of trans people, they are questioning their very right to be who they are and to live authentically. And, as we saw long before the Civil Rights Movement, during the Civil Rights Movement, after the Civil Rights Movement, there have been businesses that have stood up, and some have suffered for it, especially before the Civil Rights Movement and during. But over time, it's like water on rock. It wears it down. Slowly but surely, it wears it down. But you can't just sit by the sidelines. I agree with everything Andrew said. We have to use our voice, and we have to use it to vote, but we also have to use to speak out in any forum that we can find. I talk with my grandkids about Mickey Mouse and Disney World and Disneyland, and they're 5 and 8 and 8-year-old twins, and they know that there's a war on Disney World right now. They're woke. I'm so proud of them. I'm so proud that my grandkids are woke.
What's the next generation in this fight? And
That's right.
So to conclude, I apologize. We didn't have time for other questions, but I hope and I feel so energized by the diversity of this discussion. Thank you, Ann, and all the panelists on your insight. But there are opportunities for what we can do. And I do want to just make one caveat that when we were having this discussion here in North Carolina, during one of our Strong Democracy Means a Strong Economy committee meeting, David Meeker, that many people know at Trophy Brewery, when they start speaking out, he said that he had 1 or 2 people who came in and yelled at him, but he had a 10-to-1 ratio of other people coming in saying, thank you for speaking out, and you've got my business now. So in closing, I want to thank all the participants for their deep insight on this very crucial issue that's affecting both large and small business communities around this country and here in North Carolina, and the overall economic stability of our economy for everyone. Third, here are ways that people can get involved. On the screen, 2 websites. I urge people to sign up for regular emails. We did here today to share your story. I know here in North Carolina, SBAF North Carolina, our Democracy and Economy Committee meets the last Monday of every month from 3 to 3:45. So there's an avenue for you to participate and be part of a broader coalition. We have opportunities to speak about this issue with the media, op-eds, signing quotes. I think CJ and others talked about sharing your story. It's so important for people to hear, because when you share your story, somebody else that's in your same shoes will feel more comfortable about sharing your story. Finally, small business owners, they do understand when voting rights are stripped from any of us. We all lose our influence over government action, whether it's access to capital, access to contracts, affordable, accessible healthcare that Valerie was mentioning that some of her members were talking about, and the child tax credit. We know when we don't have a true democracy, those economic factors that help support and strengthen our business are lost. We all know that these issues are not mutually exclusive to the need that a strong democracy means a strong economy. I want to thank you all very much, and I look forward in working with all of you in the future. Thank you.